If you thought the storm inside NASCAR was finally calming down, you were wrong, because something strange is happening inside Richard Childress Racing. Something that doesn't fully make sense. Something that feels bigger than just one interview. And when Richard Childress finally spoke for the first time since that explosive antitrust trial back in December, he didn't sound like a man at peace. He sounded like a man who hasn't forgotten, and maybe hasn't forgiven. But before we get to that fire, we need to understand the smoke that's been building around this sport. On Friday night, the NASCAR Hall of Fame welcomed 3 new names into history. It was supposed to be a celebration, and in many ways, it was. Kurt Busch walked in with a resume that demands respect. 34 Cup Series wins, a championship, a Daytona 500 trophy. He made every team better, from Phoenix Racing to Furniture Row to Ganassi. Even at 23XI Racing near the end of his career, he was still lifting that program higher. Yes, he needed second chances off the track. We all remember the controversies. But behind the wheel there was never any doubt. He belonged among the elite. Harry Gant, the Bandit, joined him. 18 Cup Series wins, and he still holds the record as the oldest NASCAR Cup Series winner in history. That's forever. No one can take that away. Seeing him there, healthy, smiling, soaking it all in, that mattered. Ray Hendrick was inducted as well. All 3 men deserved that moment. But here's where the conversation shifts. For years, there was an unofficial rule: 25 Cup Series wins. That was the magic number. Dale Earnhardt Jr. had 26 when he got in. Carl Edwards had 28. That line made sense. It felt right. But now that line is fading. NASCAR used to induct 5 people each year. Now it's 3. 2 from the modern era ballot, 1 from another category. And because the sport keeps bringing in new names every single year, that benchmark keeps sliding down. Ricky Rudd got in with 23 wins and no championship. Jeff Burton made it with 21 and no title. Now Harry Gant is in with 18 and no championship. Each of them had something special. Ricky Rudd was an Ironman. Jeff Burton has done incredible work in broadcasting and leadership. Harry Gant owns that age record forever. But still, the bar is dropping. And if it keeps dropping, where does it stop? Here's a thought that might make you uncomfortable. William Byron has 16 career wins, 2 Daytona 500 trophies, no championship yet. If he retired tomorrow, based on the current trend, he'd probably be on track for the Hall of Fame someday. Does that feel right? He's talented. He's young. He has a bright future. But is that Hall of Fame level right now? The Hall of Fame is supposed to represent the absolute best this sport has ever produced. Not the very good. Not the almost legendary. The best. Maybe NASCAR needs something like baseball's Hall of Very Good. A separate space for drivers who had strong careers but didn't quite reach legendary status. Because once you lower the bar too far, it's hard to raise it back up. And while fans are debating that, something else just quietly died. Throwback weekend at Darlington. Bob Pockras confirmed it. NASCAR will no longer ask teams to run official throwback paint schemes at the spring Darlington race. Just like that, gone. Darlington will still celebrate NASCAR history. There will be a parade. Former drivers will appear. Teams can still do tribute schemes if they want, but it's no longer the main focus. And that hurts. For a decade, Throwback Weekend gave that race personality. Fans waited all year to see the creative paint schemes. We argued about them, ranked them, praised the best ones, roasted the worst ones. It was fun. It gave the spring Darlington race an identity because, let's be honest, the Southern 500 in September is the crown jewel. It's iconic. Legendary. The spring race always felt like the awkward little brother, just lost its personality. The reason? Sponsors. Big teams were struggling to go to sponsors who pay millions and ask them to change colors and branding for one weekend. That's a tough sell. Sponsors want visibility, brand recognition, not a temporary costume. But still, there were ways to keep the spirit alive. Sponsors could lean into vintage styles. Drivers and crews could dress up. There were creative options. Instead, the official tradition is gone. And maybe that feels symbolic because right now it feels like NASCAR is losing pieces of its identity one by one. Which brings us back to Richard Childress. Back to that courtroom. Back to those text messages that exploded into public view. Former NASCAR president Steve Phelps called Childress a redneck and an idiot. Those messages became public during the trial. They were ugly, personal, brutal. But that wasn't the only shock. During the trial, NASCAR's attorneys revealed that Richard Childress only owned 60% of RCR. The other 40% owned by an investment group in New York. Then came the bombshell. Evidence that Childress had explored selling his stake in the team. And in that moment, on the witness stand, something changed. Childress snapped. He demanded to know how they got that information because it was supposed to be under an NDA, confidential, private. Yet, somehow NASCAR had it. The lawsuit eventually settled. 23XI Racing, Front Row Motorsports, and NASCAR reached an agreement. But one question never got a clear answer. How did NASCAR obtain that confidential RCR information? And what happens next? Richard Childress recently broke his silence, and his words were not calm. They were not forgiving. As far as the personal damages that came to me, if I tell you what I think now, you'd probably be bleeping me out. So, that is still to be carried on in the future. The personal attacks against me. And I'm like an old elephant. You don't forget. Read that again. I'm like an old elephant. You don't forget. That's not closure. That's a warning. And if Richard Childress doesn't forget, what does that mean for NASCAR? Because when a man like Richard Childress says he doesn't forget, you should believe him. This isn't just any team owner. This is a man who built Richard Childress Racing from nothing. A former driver who turned grit into an empire. Championships, Daytona 500 wins, legends behind the wheel. For decades, RCR has been one of the pillars of NASCAR. And now that pillar feels cracked. Let's go back to that courtroom for a second. The antitrust trial was already messy. Teams pushing back against NASCAR. Questions about charters, control, power, money. Then suddenly, boom. Those leaked text messages hit like a bomb. Former NASCAR president Steve Phelps calling Childress a stupid redneck and an idiot. Those weren't rumors. They were read out loud. Public. Permanent. And think about that.